Hey everybody. Topic today is engine mounts for the LS engine. And this is a follow-up to those of you who've been watching. I've been helping my son put an LS engine into a 1987 Cadillac Brougham, or GM, what they called a D-body in those days, a full-size rear-wheel drive Cadillac. And we've been having some challenges. You know, the outside world kind of says, hey, you bolt these adapter brackets on and you drop it in and life is happy. And we've been through this now. We've gone through about 3 or 4 loops with engine mounts, and I've learned a lot as we go along. And I'm still not sure I've got everything completely knocked down correct, but this video is to give you the benefit of my experience so you can see what we've gone through and where we're at. I'm going to show you where we bring back some things from the Cadillac. I'm going to show you a little bit out of my Camaro actually. And I've got kind of a PowerPoint slideshow that just kind of shows what some cartoons about how things go together and how things adapt, at least in our case. And what I'm going to say is that, you know, the Cadillac, we didn't know for sure when we went into the Cadillac. There are multiple sets of holes for the rubber engine mounts to bolt into the frame, into the cross member that goes across the front. And the original engine was an Oldsmobile, and it had certain bolt holes, and those mounts came out. But there were, like I say, multiple sets. And we weren't sure what we were going to do, or we were going to have to drill holes or whatever, but we got a set of Chevrolet engine mounts, essentially what you would have in a Caprice or an Impala. Or they're the same rubber mounts that I use in my Camaro, identical part number. They're the same rubber mounts, I believe, that you would find in a Monte Carlo or, So, again, GM, to do things to be sort of common, they make parts a lot of times that, fit multiple cars. And they perhaps set up to do multiple engines in a single car. And so we looked at them, and when the holes lined up, we said, hey, this is where we ought to be. And we're going to put the rubber mounts there, and we're going to adapt to them. Well, that didn't work quite so good. And again, you're going to see in a few minutes what we ran into. We had several ways of going at it. One of them was to re-drill. But the amount we needed to move the mounts if we re-drilled was about half the diameter of the hole, maybe 3/4, but the holes would have overlapped. And that makes it really hard to drill for one, and then the holes are too big. And could we have repositioned things? Maybe. But we think we have a solution, and we're going to go forward with it. And like I say, it was more complicated than I expected because, if you go on the internet and you start searching around and you look at places that sell parts, it's like, hey, bolt these on and drop in and life would be good. And so I'm kind of focused on, what I'm doing probably applies to most General Motors cars of the 1980s that would have had a V8 small block Chevy in them, that now you're trying to put a V8 LS engine onto that same set of mounts, basically. And I say, more fun. So, here goes. And here, just for review, are the mounting plates and brackets that we started with on the LS first time around. These brackets are from UMI for a, what was it, 86 Monte Carlo V8, small block, into the car. And along with the adapter plates and the clamshell mounts. Alright, we have the engine sitting in the bay on the hoist just for trial fit, and it's not going perfectly. So what we want to look at is we have the Chevy clamshell mounts sitting on the frame. The bolts are just in the holes. The adapter plates and the brackets on the engine, and the engine brackets are off. They're supposed to fit a Monte Carlo for 350 from the 80s, right?
Mid-80s.
Mid-80s. Which I think is actually also the same bracket that would be used in a B car. It's a pretty common bracket. But anyway, when you get in here and you look at it straight, first of all, we're stopping here on the edge of the mount. Ultimately, this bracket ought to go in and rest here, and the bolt hole should line up. So one would be we may need to grind some off the edge of the brackets so that they get past here, because you want them to be able to drop straight down in. And we kind of have the same thing on the opposite side. It's not letting the engine go all the way down. Now we'll probably try to fiddle with that here for test purposes, but in any case, it seems as if maybe the adapter plates are pushing the bracket out a little wider than stock, because the holes are not, looks like we're a little bit wide. And so we'll need to see whether we either elongate these holes and move them up, or weld them up and re-drill them and move them up, or adjust the bracket where it attaches to the frame. Not sure yet, but we're going to keep going at it here and see what we can learn. We had to make the holes bigger because with these plates that spaced the bracket out too far to clear. But they were clearance holes originally, so we'll make sure we have hard washers in and or spacers and or, you know, make sure we can torque these down tight to the mount so they can't move. But at this point, I think we have both sides now.
Yep, that one's on it too.
So that we trimmed the bracket so that this part of the bracket sits on that bar, front and rear, and we had to trim the outside enough that it could get inside this bar. Okay, so then what happened? We didn't like those mounts because, well, first of all, we had to open up the holes and they were torched out, and they still were too wide, and they were sitting too low. The clearance to the cross member from the oil pan was way too little. So we decided to grab a pair of these OER reproduction factory mounts for a V8 Chevrolet and bolt those to the adapter plates. And we got those in, and once again here you're going to see that these mounts sit too wide. They won't sit on the bars on the mounts either. You can see here on both sides it's considerably too wide. So Dan went ahead and measured. We've got the mounts sitting on the frame, and he's going, center distance, or one edge of the bolt across to the bolt on the other side with the engine out of the way so he could go straight across. And he's got a measurement around 16.5 or 16 3/8, kind of that mythical 16.5 that I was watching for. And that's what we would need to do to match up to the frame. So then we said, well, what could we get that would fit? And we found these are actually not, these are supposed to be Dirty Dingo's one-piece adapter plates. He actually found them from another source that sort of duplicates Dirty Dingo's parts for less money. I don't know whether they're an absolute match or not, but that was the plan. And we installed those. And the difference with those a little bit is that they're slotted on the bottom, so you can go wider or narrower, and they are supposed to fit this chassis and match to the LS engine block. So the goal was to get from an LS block pattern directly to what would be a B car cross member and a B car factory mount. Now Dan had to play with this a little bit because they're slotted to get the engine centered up in the slots. But now that he's done, he's got, what is that, a 3/8 bolt going between the pan and the cross member, so that worked. And this was the other place where we were having tight clearance. He's now got good clearance between this front pulley and the steering stabilizer, which was causing us some concern. I've got my 85 Camaro up on the ramps today, and I was just trying to get a comparison point, because we've had a little bit of fun dealing with the mounts on the LS and getting things to line up. So here's a reference point. What I've done, see, here are my mounts up on top, and you'll see there's a string hanging off of that mount, and on the opposite side, same thing. I've got a piece of fishing line around the mount, around the bolt, and it's hanging off the same side on both bolts. The idea is I want to figure out what the center distance is between the mounts. So it's like a poor man's plumb bob, right? So the string is off the right-hand side of the mount, bolt. It hangs down, and I've got a nut hanging on the end of it. Same thing on the opposite side, right-hand side of the bolt, string down to the bottom. And when I measure across here, I've seen a lot of things that suggest the answer should be around 16.5 inches. When I measure across to my strings here, and you have to use the strings because the oil pan's in the way and you can't get a straight measurement going across. So when I measure between the strings on this car, I get about 16 7/8. Now if it were supposed to be, say, 16.5, there's always some tolerance, but I thought it might be a standard that they're always the same. But I know in this Camaro, this is 1985, I know that the engine was positioned a little bit off-center on purpose. And so the brackets are special. They're different one side to the other to try to get things to line up. So anyway, reference point on this car is just under 17 inches. Like I say, 16 7/8. Now, one other piece I want to mention here is one of the reasons you like factory brackets is, see, the rubber mounts, see, now first of all, terminology. To me, this is the bracket up here. The rubber piece here with the metal shell around it is the clamshell that people talk about. And it's kind of called a clamshell style mount because the rubber is trapped inside the steel shell. And if you go back to the 1960s, there was a big recall on Chevys because they didn't have this design. And if the rubber tore, the engine could lift up. And in those days, they didn't even have cables. They had linkage throttle, and it would, you could stick the throttle linkage. So it was a big deal once upon a time. So these designs keep the rubber trapped so the mount is supposed to be safer. At least that's the theory. And then there's a metal bar here and there's a metal bar here, and you can see how the shape of the mount of the bracket, how the shape of the bracket sits on top of those bars that are in the rubber mount. And the beauty of that is that the weight is carried on those bars, not on the bolt. And the factory installs the engine, sets it on those bars, and then you have clearance holes and you push the bolt through the hole, and you don't have to have a jack underneath the engine to get that bolt in. If you don't have this style mount that sits on the bars, then you need to have a jack or an engine hoist or something so that you can line it up and get that bolt through the hole. And then on top of that, the mounts are actually tuned for the weight of the engine to be sitting on those bars, and the stiffness of the rubber is based on those brackets sitting on the clamshell mount bars. And so if you got a choice, you'd really like to have this style mount. Now in the work that we're doing on the LS in the Cadillac, we put these clamshell mounts in the logical holes on the frame. I think I got to double check that measurement. But with the adapter plates, we're not able to get this style mount. The steel brackets that we could get don't line up with the mounts. And so we've gone to a steel bracket that will support the engine on the bolt without supporting it on the bars. Still looking at other options, but right now that seems to be the way we can go. The difference is that you may get more idle shake because the mounts are not tuned the same way. You know, looking at the pattern on these steel brackets, so this is the driver's side, left-hand side mount, looking from the front to the back. And you see how, you know, the clearance here. Now let's go over to the other side. And when you look at that one, look at the additional space between the clamshell and the block. Right? There's a big gap. You can see right here how much space there is where the bolt is to the clamshell, versus on this side where there's not very much space from the bolt to the clamshell. The clamshells are the same, but they're positioned differently so that the engine, I say, I haven't measured this, but I've been told that that they're different because they want the engine offset in the engine compartment slightly. Passenger mount, driver's mount. So what's this all about anyway? And I showed this picture at the beginning, but this is what a standard Gen 1 small block Chevy looks like. You've got engine brackets that go to these clamshell mounts that sit on the frame. And then when you go to a LS, you put an adapter plate in between. And they advertise that everything is great and it just bolts in. But what seems to be happening is that the plates push the mounts out further, and then the bolts don't line up. You get wider than what the factory intended. So one thing I wasn't able to verify was the difference in the widths of the blocks between an LS and an original Gen 1. It's hard to say exactly, and I couldn't find any references that gave me the dimensions. The only thing I really know is that the LS was supposed to be on the same bore centers as the original engine so that it could go down the same machining line, which means the sides of the block ought to be close. All I could say is that when you look at this, it appears that when you put the adapter plates in, you're widening things out too much. And so then, you know, what do you do about it? Well, one is you could move the mounts up and re-drill holes, but the amount is such that you'd only re-drill the holes about half a hole. It isn't just practical to move them, you know, a half an inch on each side and re-drill the holes because you'd end up overlapping the holes. I think we could have also gone back and gotten the original mounts, steel brackets that we started with, and be more careful. He had a friend cut the holes out larger, and we probably needed to sneak up on it and maybe make it a slotted hole rather than just a bigger hole. So the last thing we did was we went to this Dirty Dingo style mount, and they make a wide variety of the mounts for different chassis, and we ended up with using those because it gets the adapter plate out, and what they've done is said we're going to make the distance from the block to the center of the bolt hole the same as the factory would have had. So I'm still not 100% happy with this because I'd love to have a mount, a bracket that sits on the mount the way the factory intended. So far I haven't found that. But for right now, we're going to go with this option 3 and use these brackets that don't use the spacer plate and make it more look like these one-piece adapters. But either way, this option 3 is the one that we looked at that looked like the best for now, and that's what we're going to go forward with.